The First Corn. A long time ago, there lived in a Pawnee village a young man who was a great gambler. Every day he played at sticks, and he was almost always unlucky. Sometimes he would lose everything he had, and would even lose things belonging to his father. His father had often scolded him about gambling, and had told him that he ought to stop it. There were two things that he never staked. These two things were his shield and his lance. One day he played sticks for a long time, and when he got through, he had lost everything that he had except these two things. When he went home at night to his father's lodge, he told his relations what he had done, and his father said to him, "My son, for a long time you have been doing this, and I have many times spoken to you about it. Now I have done. I cannot have you here any longer. You cannot live here in my lodge or in this village. You must go away." The young man thought about it for a little while, and then he said, "Well, I will go. It does not make much difference where I am." So he took his shield and his spear and went out of the lodge and started to go away from the village. When he got outside of the village and had gone some distance, he heard behind him a loud rushing sound, like a strong wind. The sound kept getting nearer and louder, and all at once it was above him. And then the sound stopped, and something spoke to him and said, "Well, I am here. I have come to find you. I have been sent, and am here on purpose to get you and take you with me." The voice that spoke to him was the wind. The wind took the young man up and carried him away towards the west. They traveled many days and passed over broad prairies, and then across high mountains, and then over high, wide plains, and over other mountains, until they came to the end of the world, where the sky bends down and touches the ground. The last thing the young man saw was the gate through the edge of the sky. A great buffalo bull stands in this gateway and blocks it up. He had to move to one side to let the wind and the young man pass through. Every year, one hair drops from the hide of this bull. When all have fallen, the end of the world will come. After they had passed through this gate, they went on, and it seemed as if they were passing over a big water. There was nothing to be seen except the sky and the water. At last they came to a land. Here were many people, great crowds of them. The wind told the young man, "These are all waiters on the Father." They went on, and at last came to the Father's lodge and went in. When they had sat down, the Father spoke to the young man and said to him, "My son, I have known you for a long time and have watched you. I wanted to see you, and that is why I gave you bad luck at the sticks, and why I sent my wind to bring you here. Your people are very hungry now because they can find no buffalo, but I am going to give you something on which you can live, even when the buffalo fail." Then he gave him 3 little sacks. The first contained squash seed, the second beans, red and white, and the third corn, white, red, blue, and yellow. The Father said, "Tie these sacks to your shield and do not loose them. When you get back to your people, give each one some of the seeds and tell him to put them in the ground. Then they will make more. These things are good to eat, but the first year do not let the people eat them. Let them put the yield away, and the next year again put it in the ground. After that they can eat a part of what grows, but they must always save some for seed, so the people will always have something to eat with their buffalo meat, and something to depend on if the buffalo fail." The father gave him also a buffalo robe and said to him, "When you go back, the next day after you have got there, call all the people together in your lodge and give them what is in this robe and tell them all these things. Now you can go back to your people." The wind took the young man back. They traveled a long time, and at last they came to the Pawnee village. The wind put the young man down, and he went into his father's lodge and said, "Father, I am here." But his father did not believe him and said, "It is not you." He had been gone so long that they had thought him dead. Then he said to his mother, "Mother, I am here." And his mother knew him and was glad that he had returned. At this time the people had no buffalo. They had scouted far and near and could find none anywhere, and they were all very hungry. The little children cried with hunger. The next day after he got back, the young man sent out an old man to go through the camp and call all the people to come to his father's lodge. When they were there, he opened his robe and spread it out, and it was covered with pieces of fat buffalo meat piled high. The young man gave to each person all he could carry, but while he was handing out the pieces, his father was trying to pull off the robe the hindquarters of the buffalo and hide them. He was afraid that the young man might give away all the meat, and he wanted to save this for their own lodge. But the young man said, "Father, do not take this away. Do not touch anything. There is enough." After he had given them the meat, he showed them the sacks of seed and told them what they were for, and explained to them that they must not eat any the first year, but that they must always save some to plant. And the people listened. Then he said to them, "I hear that you have no buffalo. Come out tomorrow, and I will show you where to go for buffalo." The people wondered where this could be, for they had traveled far in all directions looking for buffalo. The next day they went out as he had told them, and the young man sent 2 boys to the top of a high hill close to camp, and told them to let him know what they saw from it. When the boys got to the top of the hill, they saw down below them, in the hollow, a big band of buffalo. When the people learned that the buffalo were there, they all took their arrows and ran out and chased the buffalo and made a big killing, so that there was plenty in the camp, and they made much dried meat. 4 days after this, he again sent out the boys, and they found buffalo. Now that they had plenty of meat, they stayed in one place, and when spring came, the young man put the seed in the ground. When the people first saw these strange plants growing, they wondered at them, for they were new and different from anything that they had ever seen growing on the prairie. They liked the color of the young stalks, and the way they tasseled out, and the way the ears formed. They found that besides being pretty to look at, they were good to eat. For when the young man had gathered the crop, he gave the people a little to taste, so that they might know the words that he had spoken were true. The rest he kept for seed. Next season, he gave all the people seed to plant, and after that, they always had these things. Later, this young man became one of the head men and taught the people many things. He told them that always when they killed buffalo, they must bring the fattest and offer them to the Father. He taught them about the sacred bundles and told them that they must put an ear of corn on the bundles and must keep a piece of fat in the bundles along with the corn, and that both must be kept out of sight. In the fall, they should take the ear of corn out of the bundles and rub the piece of fat over it. Thus they would have good crops and plenty of food. All these things the people did, and it was a help to them in their living. End of The First Corn in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11, read by Brianna Childs, September 13, 2021.
How Thor Lost His Hammer. Come, Loki, are you ready? My goats are eager to be off, cried Thor, as he sprang into his chariot, and away they went, thundering over the hills. All day long they journeyed, and at night they lay down to rest by the side of a brook. When Balder, the bright sun god, awoke them in the morning, the first thing Thor did was reach out for Mjolnir, his magic hammer, which he had carefully laid by his side the night before. "Why, Loki," cried he, "alas, my hammer is gone! Those evil frost giants must have stolen it from me while I slept. How shall we hold Asgard against them without my hammer? They will surely take our stronghold." "We must go quickly and find it," replied Loki. "Let us ask Freya to lend us her falcon garment." Now the goddess Freya had a wonderful garment made of falcon feathers, and whoever wore it looked just like a bird. As you may suppose, this was sometimes a very useful thing. So Thor and Loki went quickly back to Asgard and drove with all speed to Freya's palace, where they found her sitting among her maidens. "Asgard is in great danger," said Thor, "and we have come to you, fair goddess, to ask if you will lend us your falcon garment, for my hammer has been carried off, and we must go in search of it." "Surely," answered Freya, "I would lend you my falcon cloak, even if it were made of gold and silver." Then Loki quickly dressed himself in Freya's garment and flew away to the land of the frost giants, where he found their king making collars of gold for his dogs and combing his horses. As Loki came near, he looked up and said, "Ah, Loki, how fare the mighty gods in Asgard?" "The Aesir are in great trouble," replied Loki, "and I am sent to fetch the hammer of Thor. And do you think I am going to be foolish enough to give it back to you, after I have had all the trouble of getting it into my power?" said the king. "I have buried it deep, deep down in the earth, and there is only one way by which you can get it again. You must bring me the goddess Freya to be my wife." Loki did not know what to say to this, for he felt sure that Freya would never be willing to go away from Asgard to live among the fierce giants. But as he saw no chance of getting the hammer, he flew back to Asgard to see what could be done. Thor was anxiously looking out for him. "What news do you bring, Loki?" cried he. "Have you brought me my hammer again?" "Alas, no," said Loki. "I bring only a message from the giant king. He will not give up your hammer until you persuade Freya to marry him." Then Thor and Loki went together to Freya's palace, and the fair goddess greeted them kindly. But when she heard their errand, and found they wished her to marry the cruel giant, she was very angry, and said to Thor, "You should not have been so careless as to lose your hammer. It is all your own fault that it is gone, and I will never marry the giant to help you get it again." Thor then went to tell Father Odin, who called a meeting of all the Aesir, for it was a very serious matter they were to consider. If the king of the giants only knew the power of the mighty hammer, he might storm Asgard and carry off the fair Freya to be his bride. So the Aesir met together in their great judgment hall, in the palace of Galdheim. Long and anxiously they talked over their peril, trying to find some plan for saving Asgard from these enemies. At last Heimdall, the faithful watchman of the Rainbow Bridge, proposed a plan. "Let us dress Thor," said he, "in Freya's robes, braid his hair, and let him wear Freya's wonderful necklace and a bridal veil." "No, indeed," cried Thor angrily. "You would all laugh at me in a woman's dress. I will do no such thing. We must find some other way." But when no other way could be found, at last Thor was persuaded to try Heimdall's plan, and the Aesir went to work to dress the mighty thunder god like a bride. He was the tallest of them all, and, of course, he looked very queer to them in his woman's clothes. But he would be small enough beside a giant. Then they dressed Loki to look like the bride's waiting maid, and the two set off for Utgard, the stronghold of the giants. When the giant king saw them coming, he bade his servants make ready the wedding feast, and invited all his giant subjects to come and celebrate his marriage with the lovely goddess Freya. So the wedding party sat down to the feast, and Thor, who was always a good eater, ate 1 ox and 8 salmon, and drank 3 casks of mead. The king watched him greatly, surprised to see a woman eat so much, and said, "Where hast thou seen such a hungry bride?" But the watchful Loki, who stood near by, as the bride's waiting maid, whispered in the king's ear, 8 nights has Freya fasted, and would take no food, so anxious was she to be your bride. This pleased the giant, and he went toward Thor, saying he must kiss his fair bride. But when he lifted the bridal veil, such a gleam of light shot from Thor's eyes that the king started back, and asked why Freya's eyes were so sharp. Again Loki replied, "For 8 nights the fair Freya has not slept, so greatly did she long to reach here." This again pleased the king, and he said, "Now let the hammer be brought and given to the bride, for the hour has come for our marriage." All this time Thor was so eager to get his treasure back that he could hardly keep still, and if it had not been for what the wily Loki said, he might have been found out too soon. But at last the precious hammer was brought and handed to the bride, as was always the custom at weddings. As soon as Thor grasped it in his hand, he threw off his woman's robes and stood out before the astonished giants. Then did the mighty Thunderer sweep down his foes, and many of the cruel frost giants were slain. Once more the sacred city of Asgard was saved from danger, for Thor was its defender, and he was careful never again to let his magic hammer be taken from him. Besides the hammer, Thor had 2 other precious things: his belt of strength, which doubled his power when he tightened it, and his iron glove, which he put on when he was going to throw his hammer. End of How Thor Lost His Hammer, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. The death of Sir Launcelot and of the Queen. When news reached Sir Launcelot in his own land of the treason of Mordred, he gathered his lords and knights together, and rested not till he had come to Britain to aid King Arthur. He landed at Dover, and there the evil tidings were told him, how the king had met his death at the hands of his traitor nephew. Then was Sir Launcelot's heart nigh broken for grief. "Alas," he cried, "that I should live to know my king overthrown by such a felon! What have I done that I should have caused the deaths of the good knights, Sir Gareth, Sir Gaheris, and Sir Gawain, and yet that such a villain should escape my sword?" Then he desired to be led to Sir Gawain's tomb, where he remained long in prayer and in great lamentation. After which he called to him kinsmen and friends, and said to them, "My fair lords, I thank you all most heartily that, of your courtesy, ye came with me to this land. That we be come to late is a misfortune that might not be avoided, though I shall mourn it my life long. And now I will ride forth alone to find my lady the Queen in the West, whither men say she has fled. Wait for me, I pray you, for 15 days, and then, if ye hear naught of me, return to your own lands." So Sir Launcelot rode forth alone, nor would he suffer any to follow him, despite their prayers and entreaties. Thus he rode some 7 or 8 days until, at the last, he came to a nunnery, where he saw in the cloister many nuns waiting on a fair lady, none other, indeed, than Queen Guinevere herself. And she, looking up, saw Sir Launcelot, and at the sight grew so pale that her ladies feared for her. But she recovered, and bade them go and bring Sir Launcelot to her presence. When he was come, she said to him, "Sir Launcelot, glad am I to see thee once again, that I may bid thee farewell, for in this world shall we never meet again." "Sweet madam," answered Sir Launcelot, "I was minded, with your leave, to bear you to my own country, where I doubt not but I should guard you well and safely from your enemies." "Nay, Launcelot," said the Queen, "that may not be. I am resolved never to look upon the world again, but here to pass my life in prayer, and in such good works as I may. But thou, do thou get back to thine own land, and take a fair wife, and ye both shall ever have my prayers." "Madam," replied Sir Launcelot, "ye know well that shall never be, and since ye are resolved to lead a life of prayer, I too will forsake the world if I can find hermit to share his cell with me, for ever your will has been mine." Long and earnestly he looked upon her as he might never gaze enough. Then, getting to horse, he rode slowly away. Nor did they ever meet again in life, for Queen Guinevere abode in the great nunnery of Elmsbury, where Sir Launcelot had found her, and presently, for the holiness of her life, was made abbess. But Sir Launcelot, after he had left her, rode on his way till he came to the cell where Sir Bedivere dwelt with the holy hermit. And when Sir Bedivere had told him all that had befallen, of the great battle in the West, and of the passing away of Arthur, Sir Launcelot flung down his arms and implored the holy hermit to let him remain there as the servant of God. So Sir Launcelot donned the serge gown and abode in the hermitage as the priest of God. Presently there came riding that way the good Sir Bors, Launcelot's nephew. For when Sir Launcelot returned not to Dover, Sir Bors and many another knight went forth in search of him. There then Sir Bors remained, and within a half year there joined themselves to these 3 many who in former days had been fellows of the Round Table, and the fame of their piety spread far and wide. So 6 years passed, and then, one night, Launcelot had a vision. It seemed to him that one said to him, "Launcelot, arise and go in haste to Elmsbury. There shalt thou find Queen Guinevere dead, and it shall be for thee to bury her." Sir Launcelot arose at once, and, calling his fellows to him, told them his dream. Immediately, with all haste, they set forth towards Elmsbury, and, arriving there the second day, found the queen dead, as had been foretold in the vision. So with the state and ceremony befitting a great queen, they buried her in the abbey of Glastonbury, in that same church where, some say, King Arthur's tomb is to be found. Launcelot it was who performed the funeral rites, and chanted the requiem, but when all was done, he pined away, growing weaker daily. So at the end of 6 weeks, he called to him his fellows, and bidding them all farewell, desired that his dead body should be conveyed to the Joyous Garde, there to be buried, for that in the church at Glastonbury he was not worthy to lie. And that same night he died, and was buried, as he had desired, in his own castle. So passed from the world the bold Sir Launcelot du Lac, bravest, most courteous, and most gentle of knights, whose peer the world has never seen, ever shall. After Sir Launcelot's death, Sir Bors and the pious knights, his companions, took their way to the Holy Land, and there they died in battle against the Turk. So ends the story of King Arthur and his noble fellowship of the Round Table. End of The Death of Sir Launcelot and of the Queen, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11.
The Punishment of Loki. The Punishment of Loki by Harper and Cummings. When Loki was driven out by the mighty Thor from Aegir's palace hall, he knew that he could never again be allowed to come among the gods in Asgard. Many times had this mischievous fire god brought trouble and sorrow to the Aesir, but now he had done the most cruel deed of all. He had slain Baldur the Good, and had driven all light and joy from Asgard. Far away he fled, among the mountains, hoping that no one would find him there, and near a lovely mountain stream he built for himself a hut with 4 doors, looking north, east, south, and west, so that if the wise All-Father on his high air throne in Asgard should see him and send messengers to punish him, the watchful Loki could see them coming and escape by the opposite door. He spent most of the days and nights thinking how he could get away from the Aesir. "If I ran into a stream and turned myself into a fish," he thought, "I wonder if they would catch me. I could keep out of the way of a hook, but then there are nets. Aegir's wife has a wonderful thing like a net for catching fish, and that would be far worse than a hook." When Loki thought of the net, he began to wonder how it was made, and the more he thought, the more he wished he could make one so as to see how a fish could keep from getting caught in it. He sat down by the fire in his little hut, took a piece of cord, and began to make a fish net. He had nearly finished it when, looking up through the open door, he saw 3 of the Aesir in the distance coming toward his hut. Loki well knew that they were coming to catch him, and, quickly throwing his net into the fire, he ran to the stream, changed himself into a beautiful spotted salmon, and leaped into the water. A moment later the 3 gods entered the hut, and one of them spied the fish net burning in the fire. "See?" cried he. "Loki must have been making this net to catch fish. He always was a good fisherman, and now this is just what we want for catching him." So they snatched the last bit of the net from the fire, and by looking at it, found out how to make another, which they took with them to the bank of the stream. The first time the net was put into the water, Loki hid between 2 rocks, and the net was so light that it floated past him. But the next time it had a heavy stone weight, which made it sink down, till Loki saw that he could not get away unless he could leap over the net. He did this, but Thor, seeing him, waded out into the stream, where he threw the net again, so that Loki must jump a second time, or else go out into the deep sea. As he leaped, Thor stooped and caught him in his hand, but the fish was so slippery that Thor could hardly hold it. In the struggle, the salmon's tail was pinched so tightly by the thunder god's strong fingers that it was drawn out to a point, and the old stories say that this is why salmon tails are so pointed ever since. Thus was Loki caught in his own trap, and dreadful was his punishment. The Aesir chained him to a high rock and placed a great, poisonous serpent hanging over the cliff above his head. If it had not been for Loki's good, faithful wife, he would have died of the poison that dropped from the snake's mouth. She watched by her husband, holding a cup above him to catch the poison. Only when she had to turn aside to empty the cup did the drops fall upon Loki. Then they gave him such terrible pain that he shook the earth with his struggles, and the people in Midgard fled from the dreadful earthquake. In Iceland, the great geysers, springs of hot water, burst through the earth, and in the Southlands, burning ashes and lava poured down the mountainsides. There, chained to the cliff, the cruel, mischievous Loki was to lie until the twilight of the gods, the dark day of Ragnarok, when all the mighty, evil monsters and beasts would get free, and the terrible battle be fought between them and the gods of Asgard. End of The Punishment of Loki in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. The Twilight of the Gods. Loki and Fenrir, the wolf, were safely bound, each to his separate cliff. But still, happiness and peace did not return to Asgard, for Baldur was no longer there, and light and joy had gone from the home of the gods. The Aesir felt that the twilight of the gods, which Odin knew was to come, must be near. Soon began a long, cold winter. Surely it must be the beginning of the Fimbulwinter, which was to come before the last great battle. From the north came cold blasts of freezing wind. Snow and ice covered the earth. Men could not see the face of the sun or the moon. Everywhere there was darkness. The people grew fierce and unhappy and wicked, for they seemed no longer to love each other. So the evil deeds of men kept on, and the fierce frost giants grew stronger and stronger. They killed the trees and flowers, and bound the lakes and rivers with icy bands. Even when summertime came, the cold still held on, and no one could see the green grass or the beautiful golden sunlight. The frost giants were pleased to see the trouble they had brought upon men, and hoped they could soon destroy Asgard and the gods. 3 long winters passed, with no light to warm and brighten the world, and after that still 3 other dreary winters. And then the eagle who sat on top of the great world tree, Yggdrasil, gave a loud, shrill cry, and at that the earth shook, the rocks crumbled and fell, so that Loki and the wolf were freed from their chains. The waters of the deep ocean rose and rolled high over the land, and up above the waves, writhing out of the deep, came the monster Midgard serpent to join in the last battle. Now, the enemies of the gods were gathering from all sides, the frost giants, the mountain giants, with Loki, Fenrir, and the Midgard serpent. Heimdall, the faithful watchman, looked from his watchtower by the Rainbow Bridge, and when he saw the host of monsters appearing and raging toward Asgard, he blew his magic horn, Gjallar, which was the signal of warning to the gods. When Father Odin heard the blast of Heimdall's horn, he hastened himself to arm for the battle. Once again, it is said the Allfather sought wisdom at Mimir's fountain, asking to know how best to lead the Aesir against their enemies. But what Mimir said to him, no one ever knew, for a second call sounded from the Gjallar horn, and the gods, with Odin at their head, rode forth from Asgard to meet their foes. Thor took his place beside Odin, but they were soon parted in the struggle. The thunder god fell upon his old enemy, the serpent, whom twice before he had tried to slay, and after a fierce fight, he at last conquered and slew the monster. But the poisonous breath from the serpent's mouth overcame the mighty Thor, and he also fell. Heimdall and Loki came face to face, and each slew the other. Thus, every one of the gods battled each with his foe, till at last the darkness grew deeper, and all, both gods and giants, lay dead. Then fire burst forth, raging from Utgard to Asgard, and all the world were destroyed in that dreadful day of Ragnarok. But this was not the end of all. After many months, and years, and even centuries had passed, a new world began to appear, with the fair ocean and the beautiful land, with a bright, shining sun by day, and the moon and stars by night. Then once more the light and heat from the sun made the grass and trees grow, and the flowers bloom. Baldur and Hodur came to this beautiful new world, and walked and talked together. Thor's sons were there too, and with them the hammer, Mjolnir, no longer for use against giants, but for helping men build homes. Two people, a man and a woman, who were kept safe through the raging fire, now came to dwell on the earth, and all their children and grandchildren lived at peace with each other in this beautiful new world. Baldur and Hodur talked often of the old days when the Aesir dwelt in Asgard, before Loki, the Wicked One, brought darkness and trouble to them. With loving words they spoke of Odin and Frigga, and the brave Tyr, who gave his right hand to save the Aesir, of mighty Thor, and faithful Heimdall, of lovely Freya, with her beautiful necklace, and of fair Iduna's garden, where they used to sit and eat her magic apples. But still, they said, we know now that this new world is fairer than the old, and here also the loving All-Father watches over his children. End of Twilight of the Gods, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. Read by Ryan Williams.
The Giant Behind the Waterfall. The giants lingered longer in the far north than elsewhere. About 200 years after the death of Charlemagne, there was living in Iceland a saga hero named Grettir the Strong. He was the most powerful man ever known in the North Country. More than once he had overcome dreaded berserks in their battle fury. On a narrow path on a cliff, he faced and conquered a huge bear with his naked hands, holding off the infuriated beast by the ears till he could topple it over the precipice. But his strength and high spirit brought him great reverses and caused him to be an outlaw for much of his troubled life. During his wanderings through the wild unknown regions as a forest man, he spent one winter under the Geitland Glacier, where the hot springs made a fair grassy valley, and here he was intimate with a giant named Thorir, whose daughters were glad to see him because not many people came there. Finding it dull, he resumed his travels and came into Bardadal. Here at Sandhagar dwelt then Steinvor, a widow with young children. The place had an evil name from a strange happening. 2 winters before Steinvor had gone as usual to celebrate Yule at the neighboring town of Adyardalsa, while her husband, Thornstein the White, stayed at home. Men lay down to sleep in the evening, and in the night they heard a great noise in the room near the farmer's bed. No one dared to get up to see what the matter was, because there were so few of them. The mistress of the house returned home the next morning, but her husband had disappeared, and no one knew what had become of him. So the next season passed. The following winter the mistress wanted to go out to Mass, and told her servant to stay at home. He was very unwilling, but said she should be obeyed. It happened just as before. This time the servant disappeared. People thought it was very strange, and found some drops of blood upon the outer door, so they supposed that some evil spirit or troll must have carried off both men. This story has spread all through the district. It came to the ears of Grettir, who, being well accustomed to deal with ghosts and spectres, turned his steps thither and arrived on Yule Eve at Sandhagar. He was disguised, as was now his custom, because his enemy Thorir had set a price on his head and called himself guest. The lady of the house saw that he was enormously tall, and the servants were terribly afraid of him. He asked for hospitality. The mistress told him that food was ready for him, but that he must see after himself. He said he would, and added, "I will stay in the house while you go to Mass if you would like it." She said, "You must be a brave man to venture to stay in the house." "I do not care for a dull life," he said. Then she said, "I do not want to remain at home, but I cannot get across the river." "I will come with you," said the pretended guest. So she made ready to go to the Mass with her little daughter. It was thawing outside. The river was flooded and covered with ice. "It is impossible for a man or horse to cross," said Steinvor. "There must be fords," said Guest. "Do not be afraid. First carry the maiden over. She is lighter." "I don't want to make 2 journeys of it," said he. "I will carry you in my arms." She crossed herself and said, "That is impossible. What will you do with the girl?" "I will find a way," said Guest. Taking them both up, he set the girl on her mother's knee, while he bore them both in his left arm, keeping his right arm free. So he carried them across. They were too frightened to cry out. The river came up to his breast, and a great piece of ice came against him, which he pushed off with the hand that was free. Then the stream became so deep that it broke over his shoulder, but he waded on vigorously till he reached the bank and put them on shore. The mistress reached Iredalsa for Mass, and everyone wondered how she had crossed the river. She said she did not know whether it was a man or a troll who had carried her over. The priest said it was certainly a man, though unlike any other men. "Let us keep silent over it. May be that he means to help you in your difficulties." She stayed there that night. Meanwhile Grettir had waded back. It was nearly dark by the time he got home to Sandhagar and called for some food. When he had eaten something, he told the servants to go to the other end of the hall. Then he got some boards and loose logs and laid them across the hall to make a great barricade, so that none of the servants could get across. No one dared to oppose him or to object to anything. The entrance was in the side wall of the hall under the back gable, and near it was a cross-bench upon which Grettir laid himself, keeping on his clothes with a light burning in the room. So he lay into the night. Towards midnight he heard a loud noise outside, and very soon there walked a huge troll wife into the room. She carried a trough in one hand and a rather large cutlass in the other. She looked around the room as she entered, and on seeing Grettir laying there, she rushed at him. He started up and attacked her furiously. They fought long together. She was the stronger, but he evaded her skillfully. Everything near them and the paneling of the back of the wall were broken to pieces. She dragged him through the hall door out to the porch, where he resisted vigorously. The troll wife wanted to drag him out of the house, but before that was done, they had broken up all the fittings of the outer door and borne them away on their shoulders. Then she strove to get to the river and among the rocks. Grettir was terribly fatigued, but there was no choice but to either brace himself or be dragged down to the rocks. All night long they struggled together, and he thought he had never met such a monster for strength. She gripped him so tightly to herself that he could do nothing with either hand but cling to her waist. When at last they reached a rock by the river, he swung the monster around and got his right hand loose. Then he quickly seized the short sword he was wearing, drew it, and struck at the troll's right shoulder, cutting off her right arm and releasing himself. She sprang among the rocks and disappeared into the waterfall. Grettir, very stiff and tired, lay long by the rock. At daylight he went back to the hall and lay down on his bed, blue and swollen all over. When Steinvor came home, she found the place all in disorder. She went to the stranger and asked him what had happened, and why everything was broken to pieces. He told her the whole adventure, just as it had happened. She thought it a matter of great moment and asked him who he was. He told her the truth, said that he wished to see a priest, and asked for her to send for one. She did so. Stein the priest came to Sandhagar and soon learnt that it was Grettir, son of Osmund, who had come there under the name of guest. The priest asked him what he thought had become of Steinvor's husband and servant who had disappeared. Grettir said that they must have been taken among the rocks. The priest said that he could not believe that unless he gave some evidence of it. Grettir declared, and later it would become known, and the priest went home. Grettir lay many days in bed, and the lady did all she could for him. He himself always declared that the troll woman sprang among the rocks in the waterfall when she was wounded, but the men of Bardadal have a tale that day dawned upon her while they were wrestling, so that when he cut off her arm she lost her powers and is still standing there on the mountain in the likeness of a hideous woman. However that may be, the dwellers in the valley kept Grettir's secret so that he was safe from his enemies and the blood feud while he lay helpless. One day that winter, after Yule, Grettir went to Eyjardalsa and met Stein, to whom he said, "I see, priest, that you have little belief in what I say. Now I wish you to come with me to the river and see for yourself what probability there is in it." The priest did so. When they reached the falls, they saw a cave up under the rocks. The cliff was there so steep that no one could climb it, and it was nearly 10 fathoms down to the water. They had a rope with them. "It is quite impossible for anyone to get down there," said the priest. Grettir answered, "It is certainly possible, and men of high mettle are those who would feel themselves happiest there. I want to see what there is back of the fall. Do you mind the rope?" The priest said that he could do so if he chose. He drove a stake into the ground and laid stones against it. Grettir now fastened a stone in the loop at the end of the rope and lowered it from above the water. "How do you mean to go?" asked Stein. "I don't mean to be bound when I come into the fall," Grettir said, "so my mind tells me." Then he prepared to go. He had few clothes on and only a short sword, no other arms. He jumped from a rock and got down to the fall. The priest saw the soles of his feet, but after that did not know what had become of him. Grettir dived beneath the fall. It was very difficult swimming because of the currents, and he had to dive to the bottom to get behind the pouring wall of the water. There was a rock when he came up, and a great cave behind the fall, in front of which the water streamed down. He went into the cave where there was a large fire burning, and a horrible great giant, most fearful to behold, sitting before it. As Grettir entered, the giant sprang up, seized a halberd, and struck at him, for he could both strike and thrust with it. It had a wooden shaft, and was the kind called heptis axe. Grettir struck back with his sword and cut through the shaft. Then the giant tried to reach up backwards to a sword which was hanging in the cave, and at that moment Grettir struck him and cut open his lower breast and stomach, so that all his entrails fell out into the river and floated down the stream. The priest, who was sitting by the rope, saw the water all thickened and bloody, and lost his head, making sure that Grettir was killed. He left the rope and ran off home, where he arrived in the evening and told them for certain Grettir was dead, and said that it was great misfortune to have lost such a man. Grettir struck few more blows at the giant before he was dead. He then entered the cave, kindled a light, and explored. It is not told how much treasure he found there, but there is said to have been some. He stayed there till late in the night, and found the bones of 2 men which he carried away in a skin. Then he came up out of the cave, swam to the rope and shook it, thinking the priest was there. Finding him gone, he had to climb up the rope, hand over hand, and so reached the top. He returned to Eyjardalsa and carried the skin with the bones in it to the vestibule of the church, together with a rune staff upon which were most beautifully carved the following lines. "Into the fall of the torrent I went. Dank its maw towards me gaped. The floods before the ogress's den, mighty against my shoulder played. Hideous the friend of Mela came, hard were the blows I dealt upon her. The shaft of heptis axe was severed, my sword has pierced the monster's breast." There too it was told how Grettir had brought the bones from the cave. When the priest came to the church on the next morning, he found the staff and all that was with it and read the runes. Grettir had returned to Sandhagar. When Stein met Grettir again, he asked him exactly what had happened, and Grettir told him. He declared the priest had held the rope very faithlessly, and Stein admitted that it was true. Men felt no doubt that these monsters were responsible for the disappearance of Thorstein and his servant, nor was there any haunting or ghost walking there afterwards. Grettir had evidently cleared the land of them. The bones were buried by the priest in the churchyard. Grettir stayed that winter and barred it all, though unknown to those who sought his blood. End of The Giant Behind the Waterfall in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. Read by Daley Blanton.
The Old Woman and the Crooked Sixpence. An old woman was sweeping her house, and she found a crooked sixpence. "What," says she, "shall I do with this sixpence? I will go to the market and buy a pig with it." She went, and as she was coming home she came to a stile. Now, the pig would not go over the stile. The woman went on a little further and met a dog. "Dog," said she, "bite Piggy. Piggy won't go over the stile, and I shan't get home tonight." But the dog would not bite the pig. The woman went on a little further, and she met a stick. "Stick," she said, "beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Piggy won't go over stile, and I shan't get home tonight." But the stick would not. The woman went on a little further, and she met a fire. "Fire," she said, "burn stick. Stick won't beat dog. Dog won't bite pig. Piggy won't go over the stile, and I shan't get home tonight." But the fire would not. The woman went on a little further, and she met some water. "Water," she said, "quench fire. Fire won't burn stick. Stick won't beat dog," etc. But the water would not. The woman went on a little further, and she met an ox. "Ox," said she, "drink water. Water won't quench fire," etc. But the ox would not. The woman went on again, and she met a butcher. "Butcher," she said, "kill ox. Ox won't drink water," etc. But the butcher would not. The woman went on a little further and met a rope. "Rope," said she, "hang butcher. Butcher won't kill ox," etc. But the rope would not. Again the woman went on, and she met a rat. "Rat," said she, "gnaw rope. Rope won't hang butcher," etc. But the rat would not. The woman went on a little further and met a cat. "Cat," she said, "kill rat. Rat won't gnaw rope," etc. "Oh," said the cat, "I will kill the rat if you will fetch me a basin of milk from the cow over there." The old woman went to the cow and asked her to have some milk for the cat. "No," said the cow, "I will let you have no milk unless you bring me a mouthful of hay from yonder stack." Away went the old woman to the stack and fetched the hay and gave it to the cow. Then the cow gave her some milk, and the old woman took it to the cat. When the cat had lapped the milk, the cat began to kill the rat began to gnaw the rope began to hang the butcher began to kill the ox began to drink the water began to quench the fire began to burn the stick began to beat the dog began to bite the pig, and Piggy, in a fright, jumped over the stile, and so after all, the old woman got safe home that night. End of The Old Woman and the Crooked Sixpence in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. Read by Bertha Mason, Nottingham.
His call to Bran. And there were some that went to Manannan's country beyond the sea, and that gave an account of it afterwards. One time, Bran, son of Feeble, was out by himself near his dun, and he heard music behind him, and it kept always after him, and at last he fell asleep with the sweetness of the sound. And when he awoke from his sleep, he saw beside him a branch of silver, and it having white blossoms, and the whiteness of the silver was the same as the whiteness of the blossoms. And he brought the branch in his hand into the royal house. And when all his people were with him, they saw a woman with strange clothing standing in the house. And she began to make a song for Bran, and all the people were looking at her and listening to her. And it is what she said. I bring a branch of the apple tree from Evan, from the far island around which are the shining horses of the son of Lear. A delight of the eyes is the plain where the host hold their games. Curra racing against chariot in the white silver plain to the south. There are feet of white bronze under it, shining through life and time. A comely level land through the length of the world's age, and many blossoms falling on it. There is an old tree there with blossoms, and birds calling from among them. Every color is shining there. Delight is common, and music, in the gentle voice plain, in the silver cloud plain to the south. Keening is not used, or treachery, in the tilled familiar land. There is nothing hard or rough, but sweet music striking on the ear. To be without grief, without sorrow, without death, without any sickness, without weakness. That is the sign of Evan. It is not common wonder, that is. There is nothing to liken its mist to. The sea washes the wave against the land. Brightness falls from its hair. There are riches, there are treasures of every color in the gentle land, the bountiful land, sweet music to be listening to, the best of wine to drink, golden chariots in the plain of the sea, rising up to the sun with the tide, silver chariots and bronze chariots on the plain of sports, gold yellow horses on the strand, and crimson horses, and others with wool on their backs, blue like the color of the sky. It is a day of lasting weather. Silver is dropping on the land, a pure white cliff on the edge of the sea, getting its warmth from the sun. The host race over the plain of sports. It is beautiful, and not weak their game is. Death, or the ebbing of the tide, will not come to them in the many-colored land. There will come at sunrise a fair man, lighting up the level lands. He rides upon the plain that is beaten by the waves. He stirs the sea till it is like blood. An army will come over the clear sea, rowing to the stone that is in sight, that 100 sounds of music come from. It sings a song to the army. It is not sad through the length of time. It increases music with hundreds singing together. They do not look for death or the ebb tide. There are 3 times 50 far islands in the ocean to the west of us, and every one of them twice or 3 times more than Ireland. It is not to all of you I am speaking, though I have made all these wonders known. Let Bran listen from the crowd of the world to all the wisdom that has been told him. Do not fall upon a bed of sloth. Do not be overcome by drunkenness. Set out on your voyage over the clear sea, and you may chance to come to the land of women. With that the woman went from them, and they did not know where she went. And she brought away her branch with her, for it leaped into her hand from Bran's hand, and he had not the strength to hold it. Then, on the morrow, Bran set out upon the sea, and 3 companies of 9 along with him, and one of his foster brothers and comrades was set over each company of 9. And when they had been rowing for 2 days and 2 nights, they saw a man coming towards them in a chariot over the sea, And the man made himself known to them, and he said that he was Mannanan, son of Lear. And then Mannanan spoke to him in a song, and it is what he said. It is what Bran thinks. He is going in his curragh over the wonderful, beautiful, clear sea. But to me, from far off in my chariot, it is a flowery plain he is riding on. What is a clear sea to the good boat Bran is in, is a happy plain, with many flowers to me in my two-wheeled chariot. It is what Bran sees, many waves beating across the clear sea. It is what I myself see, red flowers, without any fault. The seahorses are bright in summertime. As far as Bran's eyes can reach, there is a wood of beautiful acorns under the head of your little boat, a wood with blossom and with fruit that has the smell of wine, a wood without fault, without withering, with leaves of the color of gold. Let Bran row on steadily. It is not far to the land of women. Before the setting of the sun, you will reach Evan of many-colored hospitality. With that, Bran went from him, and after a while, he saw an island, and he rode around it, and there was a crowd on it, wondering at them, and laughing, and they were all looking at Bran and at his people, but they would not stop to talk with them, but went on giving out gusts of laughter. Bran put one of his men on the island then, but he joined with the others, and began to stare the same way as the men of the island. And Bran went on rowing round about the island, and whenever they went past his own man, his comrades would speak to him, but he would not answer them, but would only stare and wonder at them. So they went away and left him on that island, that is called the Island of Joy. It was not long after that they reached to the land of women, and they saw the chief one of the women at the landing place, and it is what she said. Come hither to land, Bran, son of Feeble. It is welcome your coming is. But Bran did not dare to go on shore. Then the woman threw a ball of thread straight to him, and he caught it in his hand, and it held fast to his palm. And the woman kept the thread in her own hand, and she pulled the curragh to the landing place. On that they went into a grand house, where there was a bed for every couple, 3 times 9 beds. And the food that was put on every dish never came to an end, and they had every sort of food and of drink they wished for. And it seemed to them they were only a year there, when the desire of home took hold on one of them. Nectin, son of Colbran, and his kinsmen were begging and praying Bran to go back with him to Ireland. The woman said there would be repentance on them if they went, but in spite of that, they set out in the end. And the woman said to them not to touch the land when they would come to Ireland, and she bade them to visit and to bring with them the man they left in the Island of Joy. So they went on towards Ireland, till they came to a place called Srub Broen, and there were people on the strand that asked them who they were that were coming over the sea. And Bran said, I am Bran, son of Feeble. But the people said, We know of no such man, though the voyage of Bran is in our very old stories. Then Nectin, son of Colbran, made a leap out of the curragh, and no sooner did he touch the shore of Ireland than he was a heap of ashes, the same as if he had been in the earth through hundreds of years. And then Bran told the whole story of his wanderings to the people, from the beginning. And after that, he bade them farewell, and his wanderings from that time are not known. End of his call to Bran in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11.
Balder. Balder was the best beloved of all the gods. Odin was their father and king. To him they turned for help and wise advice. But it was to Balder they went for loving words and bright smiles. The sight of his kind face was a joy to the Aesir, and to all the people of Midgard. They sometimes called him the God of Light, and a good name for him because he truly gave to the world light and strength. Balder was the son of Odin and Frigga. He was the most gentle and lovely of all the gods. His beautiful palace in Asgard was bright and spotless. No evil creature could enter there. No one who had wrong thoughts could stay in that palace of love and truth. At last, after the bright summer was over, for many days Balder had looked sad and troubled. Some of the Aesir saw it, but most of all his loving, watchful mother, Frigga. Balder could not bear to worry his mother, so he kept his sorrow to himself, saying nothing about it. But at last Frigga drew his secret from him, and then his friends knew that Balder had had dreams which told of coming trouble. Dreams of his leaving all his friends and going away from Asgard to dwell in another land. Odin and Frigga, fearing the dreams might come true, and they must lose their beloved son, began to think what they could do to prevent it. Then the loving mother said, "I will make all things in the world promise not to hurt our son." And so Queen Frigga sent out for everything in the whole world, and everything came trooping to Asgard, to her palace. All living creatures came from the land, from the water, and from the air. All plants and trees came, all rocks, stones, and even metals under the earth, where the busy dwarves worked. Fire came, and water, as well as all poisons and sicknesses. Everything promised not to harm the good Balder, except one little plant called mistletoe, which was so small that Frigga did not send for it, feeling sure it could not do any harm. "Now I am happy once more," said the queen, "for our Balder is safe." And she sat at peace in her beautiful palace, rejoicing that her dear son was free from all danger. But Odin, the wise All-Father, still felt uneasy, even after all these promises, fearing what might happen. So he took his 8-footed steed, Sleipnir, and rode forth from Asgard to the underworld to find Hela, the wise woman who ruled over the far-off land. She could tell everything that was going to happen, and she knew the names of all those who were coming to dwell with her. Odin was the only one wise enough to speak with Hela, for no one else knew the words that would call her forth from the dwelling. But when Odin called, she came to answer. "Tell me," said he, "for whom are you making ready this costly room?" "We made ready for Balder, the god of light," replied Hela. "Who then will slay Balder and bring such darkness and sorrow to Asgard?" Again said the white woman, "It is Hoder, Balder's twin brother, who will slay the sun god." And with these words she vanished. Sadly, Father Odin returned to Asgard and told his wife the words of Hela. But Frigga was not troubled in her heart, for she felt sure that nothing would hurt her dear son. One beautiful sunny day at the end of summer, the gods had all gone out to an open field beyond Asgard to have some sports. As they all knew that nothing could hurt Balder, they placed him at the end of the field for a target, and they took turns throwing their darts at him, just for the fun of seeing them fall off without hurting him. They thought this was showing great honor to Balder, and he was pleased to join in the sport. Loki happened to be away when they began to play, and when he came, was angry in his heart that nothing could hurt Balder. "Why should he be so favored? I hate him," said Loki to himself, and began at once to plan something evil. All this while Queen Frigga sat in her palace, thinking of all her dear sons and of how much good they did to men. As she sat thus thinking and spinning with her hands, there came a knock at the door. The queen called, "Come in," and an old woman stood before her. Frigga spoke kindly to her, and soon the old woman said she had passed by the field where the gods were playing and throwing sharp weapons at Balder. "Oh yes," said Frigga. "Neither metal nor wood can hurt him, for all things in the world have given me their promise." "What?" said the old woman. "Do you mean that all things have really vowed to spare Balder?" "All," replied the queen, "except one little plant that grows on the eastern side of Asgard. It is called mistletoe, and I thought it too small and soft to do any harm." Before long the old woman went away, and when she was quite out of sight of Frigga's palace, threw off her woman's clothes. And who do you suppose it was? Why, no woman at all, but that wicked Loki, of course, who hurried away out of Asgard to find the poor little plant that did not know about Balder's danger. When he came to the palace where the plant grew, Loki cut off a branch, quickly made a sharp arrow, which he carried back to the playground, where the Aesir were still at their game, all but one, Hodor, the god of darkness, Balder's blind twin brother. Then Loki went up to Hodor and said to him in a low voice, "Why do you not join with the others in doing honor to Balder?" "I cannot see to take aim, you know, and besides, I have no weapon," said Hodor. "Come then, here is a fine new dart for you, and I will guide your hand," whispered wicked Loki. Then he slipped the arrow of mistletoe wood into Hodor's hand and aimed it himself at Balder, who stood there so bright and smiling. Then poor blind Hodor heard a dreadful cry from all the gods. Balder the Beautiful had fallen, struck by the arrow. He would now be taken away from them to live with Hela in the underworld. Every heart was filled with sorrow for this dreadful loss, but no one tried to punish him who had done the wicked deed, for they stood upon sacred ground, and the field was named the Peace Stead, or Place of Peace, where no one might hurt another. Besides, the gods did not know it was false Loki who hated Balder that had struck him down. When Frigga heard the sad news, she asked who would win her love by going to the underworld and begging Hela to let Balder come back to them. Hermod, the swift messenger god, ready to do his mother's bidding, set forth at once on the long journey. 9 days and nights he traveled, without resting, until he came to Hela's underworld. There he found Balder, who was glad to see him, and sent messages to his friends in Asgard. Hela said Balder might return to them in one condition, that every living creature and everything in the world must weep for him. So Hermod hastened back to Asgard, and when the Aesir heard Hela's answer, they sent out messengers over the world to bid all things weep for Balder, their bright sun god. Then did the beasts, the birds, the fishes, the flowers and trees, even stones and metals weep, as indeed we can see the teardrops come to all things when they are changed from heat to cold. As the messengers were coming back to Asgard, they met an old woman, whom they bade weep, but she replied, "Let Hela keep Balder down below, why should I care?" When the Aesir heard of this, they thought it must have been the same old woman who went before to Frigga's palace, and we know who that was. And so, Balder the Beautiful, Balder the Bright, did not come back, and all the dwellers in Asgard were sad and sorrowful without him. End of Balder in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. Read by Ashaya Reyes, Naples, Florida, October 5th, 2021.
The Cow of Plenty. Gobnu, the smith, had the Cow of Plenty. She walked all over Ireland in a day's grazing and gave milk to everyone that came to her. There was no one hungry or sorrowful in Ireland in those days. Balor of the Evil Eye set his heart on the cow. He had the grasping hand that is never filled, and there was nothing good in his country. He sent the best man he had to steal the Cow of Plenty. The man stole her, But as he was taking her away, Gobnu saw him and let out a battle roar that shook stars from the sky. The man made a leap into the darkness and got off. Gobnu had the cow, but the Fomorian had the halter. Now the luck of the world was in the halter, and wherever the halter was, the cow would follow it. Gobnu got little good of the cow after that. He had to keep his eyes on her morning, noon, and night, for fear she would go into Balor's country. He had to tramp behind her when she took her day's grazing all over Ireland. And the days seemed long to Gobnu the Wondersmith. One day, a young champion in a red cloak fringed with gold came to him and stood outside his door and saluted him. "O Wondersmith, O Gobnu, will you make a sword for me? It must be long and keen-edged and a death-biter, a sword for a champion. Will you make it, Gobnu? No smith in Ireland can make a sword for champion feats but yourself." "It's little trouble I would have with the sword, young champion, but I must follow my cow from morning till night. If once I took my eyes off her, she would go to Balor in the land of the Fomor." "If you make the sword for me, I will follow the cow from morning till night and never take my eyes off her once." "If you do that, Cian, son of Dion Kecht, I will make the sword." It was agreed between them, and the smith set to the making of the sword while Cian followed the cow. She walked all over Ireland that day, and Cian was not sorry when she came at night to the house of Gobnu. There was light within, and some men stood at the door. They said to Cian, "The Wondersmith has made the sword for you and waits to put the tempering on it. He can't do that till you go within and hold the sword hilt." It was a joy to Cian to hear this, and he ran in quickly. "Where is the cow?" said the smith. "She is without," said Cian. "My head to you if she is not." "She is not without," said the smith. "She is with Balor." And he ran to the door. The cow was gone. "I have only my head to give you now, O Gobnu." "I will not take your head, Cian, son of Dion Kecht, but I will take another Eric from you. Go now in search of the halter. It is with Balor in the land of the Fomorians. The road is hard to find that leads there, and the dark waters are ill to cross. But do not turn back or leave off seeking till you get the halter of the cow." "I will not come back to Ireland," said Cian, "without the halter of the cow." Cian set out, and he traveled and traveled till he came to the dark waters. And when he came to them, he could find no boat to cross. He waited there for 3 days and nights, searching for a boat. And then he saw a small, poor-looking boat with an old man in it. Cian looked at the boat, but although he was a good champion and had cleverness, he did not know that he was looking at the ocean sweeper, the boat that could carry anyone in a moment to whatever place they wished to be. And he did not know that the old man was the tawny Mannanan, the son of Lear, who rules all the oceans of the world. "Old man," said Cian, "will you row me across the waters to the land of Balor?" "I will row you, young champion, if you swear to give me half of what you gain there." "I will share everything with you but the halter of Gobnu's cow." "I will not ask for that," said the boatman. "Be it so," said the other. They stepped into the boat, and in a moment they touched the land of the Fomor. "You have helped me in need, old man," said Cian. "I have a gold ring, and my cloak is rich. I pray you keep them both." "I will change cloaks," said the old man, "but I will not take the ring." He put his hand on Cian's fingers. "I leave you a gift," he said. "Whatever lock you touch will open before you." He put his cloak on Cian's shoulders. "It covers you as night covers the earth. Beneath it, you are safe, for no one can see you." The cloak fell about Cian in long folds. He knew there was magic in it, and turned to look closely at the old man. But he could not see him, and the boat was gone. Cian was in a strange country, all cold and desolate and death-looking. He saw fierce warriors of the Fomor, but the cloak sheltered him, and he reached the court of Balor without mishap. "What seek you of me?" said Balor. "I would take service with you," said Cian. "What can you do?" "Whatever the Dodonans can do," said Cian. "I could make grass grow in this land, where grass never grew." Balor looked pleased when he heard that, for he had the greatest desire in the world for a garth of apple trees, like the apple trees Mannanan had in the island of Avalon, that were so beautiful people made songs about them. "Can you make apple trees grow?" said he to Cian. "I can," said Cian. "Well," said Balor, "make me a garth of apple trees, like the garth Mannanan has. And when I see apples on the trees, I will give you your own asking of reward." "I have only one reward to ask," said Cian, "and I will ask for it at the beginning. It is the halter of Gabnu's cow." "I will give you that," said Balor, "without deceit." Cian was glad when he made the bargain, and he began to work. He had his sufficiency of trouble over the grass, for every blade that grew for him in the morning was withered by Balor's breath at night. After a while, he had apple trees, and as he used to be minding them, he often looked at a great white dun that was near. Warriors of the Fomorians were always guarding it, and one day he asked who it was lived there. "Ethlin, Balor's daughter, lives there," said the man he asked. "She is the most beautiful woman in the world, but no one may see her, and she is shut in the dun lest she should marry, for it is said that a son born of her will slay Balor." Cian kept thinking of this, and there was a wish on him to see the beautiful woman. He put the magic cloak on him and went to the dun. When he laid his hand on the door, it opened because of the enchantment on his fingers. He went in and found Balor's daughter. She was sitting at a loom, weaving a cloth that had every color in it, and singing as she wove. Cian stood a while looking at her, till she said, "Who is here that I cannot see?" Then he dropped the cloak. Balor's daughter loved him when she saw him, and chose him for her man. He came to her many times after that, and they took oaths of faithfulness to one another. There was a child born to them, and he was so beautiful that whatever place he was in seemed to be full of sunshine. Ethlin, his mother, called him Lu, which means light, but Cian, his father, used to call him the sun god, and both names stuck to him, but Lu was the name he was best known by. Now Balor was watching the apple trees, and when he saw apples on them, he brought the halter of Gabnu's cow to his daughter, and said, "Hide this, and when I am asked for it, it will be gone from me." Balor's daughter took the halter, and a little afterwards, Cian came to her with a branch of apples. "The first apples for you," he said. She gave him the halter. "Take it, and the child, and go away to the land you came from." "That is a hard saying," said Cian. "There is nothing else to do," said she. Cian took the child and the halter, and wrapped his cloak about him. He said farewell to Balor's daughter, and went till he came to the dark waters. A boat was there before him, and the old man in it. Cian thought they were a short time in crossing. "Do you remember our bargain?" said the old man. "I do," said Cian, "but I have nothing but the halter and this child. I will not make two halves of him." "I had your word on it," said the old man. "I will give you the child," said Cian. "You will never be sorry for it," said the old man, "for I will foster him and bring him up like my own son." The boat touched the land of Ireland. "Here is your cloak," said Cian, "and take the child." Manannan took the little child in his arms, and Cian put the cloak about him, and when he shook it out, it had every color of the sea in it, and a sound like the waves when they break on a shore with the music of bells. The old man was beautiful and wonderful to look at, and Cian cried out to him, "I know you now, Manannan MacLear, and it was in a lucky hour I gave my son to you, for he will be brought up in Tir na Nog, and will never know sorrow or defeat." Manannan laughed, and lifted the little sun god high up in his two hands. "When you see him again, Cian, son of Dion Cecht, he will be riding on my own white horse, and no one will bar his way on land or sea. Now, take farewell of him, and may gladness and victory be with you." Manannan stepped into the boat. It was shining with every color of the rainbow, as clear as crystal, and it went without oars or sails, with the water curling round the sides of it, and the little fishes of the sea swimming before and behind it. Cian set his face towards the house of Gobnu, the smith. He came to it, and he had the halter in his hand. And when he came, the cow was there before him, and Gobnu came out to meet him. "A welcome before you, young champion, and may everything you undertake have a happy ending." "The same wish to yourself," said Cian, and gave him the halter. The smith gave Cian the sword then, and there was gladness and friendship between them ever after. End of The Cow of Plenty in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11.
The Baker's Dozen by Charles M. Skinner. Bas Bos Volkert John Petersen van Amsterdam kept a bake shop in Albany and lives in history as the man who invented New Year cakes and made gingerbread babies in the likeness of his own fat offspring. Good churchman though he was, the bane of his life was a fear of being bewitched, and perhaps it was to keep out evil spirits, who might make one last effort to gain the mastery over him. Ere he turned the customary leaf with the incoming year, and he had primed himself with an extra glass of spirits last night of 1654. His sales had been brisk, and he has sat in his little shop, meditating comfortably on the gains he would make when his harmless rivals, the Knickerbackers, bakers of marbles, sent for their usual supply of ollie coaches and mince pies on the morrow. He was startled by a sharp rap, and an ugly old woman entered. "Give me a dozen New Year's cookies," she cried in a shrill voice. "Well then, you needn't speak so loud. I ain't deaf, then." "A dozen," she screamed. "Give me a dozen. Here are only 12. Well then, 12 is dozen. One more. I want a dozen." "Well then, if you want another, go to the devil and get it." Did the hag take him at his word? She left the shop, and from that time it seemed as if poor Volkart was bewitched. Indeed, for his cakes were stolen. His bread was so light that it went up the chimney, when it was not so heavy that it fell through the oven. Invisible hands plucked bricks from that same oven and pelted him until he was blue. His wife became deaf, his children went unkept, and his trade went elsewhere. Thrice the old woman reappeared, and each time was sent anew to the devil. But at last, in despair, the baker called on St. Nicholas to come and advise him. His call was answered with startling quickness, for, almost while he was making it, the venerable patron of Dutch feasts stood before him. The good soul advised the trembling man to be more generous in his dealings with his fellows, and after a lecture on charity he vanished, when lo, the old woman was there in his place. She repeated her demand for one more cake, and Volkart, Jan Peterson, etc. gave it, whereupon she exclaimed, "The spell is broken, and from this time a dozen is 13. Taking from the counter a gingerbread effigy of St. Nicholas, she made the astonished Dutchman lay his hand upon it and swear to give more liberal measure in the future. So, until 13 new states arose from the ruins of the colonies, when the shrewd Yankees restored the original measure, 13 made a baker's dozen. End of The Baker's Dozen in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. Read by Ashaya